You're welcome to give us a call, 011-542-2186, the ANC versus the ANC. And what does this mean for the nomination process going forward? Kim Heller is a political analyst, joins us in studio, and Botsang Moilwa, a political analyst as well. Thank you so much for your time, and good evening to you. Life and death situation, it seems like it, Kim, with the ANC now going into its national elective conference. What do you make out of all this litigation?
Indeed, and I think your ANC versus ANC is a very salient and tragic headline, actually, 5 days before the electoral conference. And if we look at the spate of court challenges, it's actually the antithesis of all the talk about unity within the ANC. And one has to question whether the court is being used as a weapon of factionalism or a legitimate instrument to resolve disputes. And the question, I think we have to ask the question, what of the might and legitimacy and credibility of these internal dispute resolution committees that have been set up by the NEC? Do they have any bite? Do they have any legitimacy? And why are people not using that ahead of these legal challenges?
And I mean, would you say that the ANC has been infiltrated, as we've heard from other leaders within the NEC structures, that this is unbecoming of ANC members in good standing in how they conduct themselves?
Well, good evening, Cindy, and my fellow panelists and the viewers. Look, ANC has always been infiltrated from the time it was a liberation movement within the MK camps. And that's why names like, Askaris and counter-revolutionaries came out of place. This is not a new thing. However, because of the unity that was existing and prevailing in the movement during the time of the liberation struggle, it was easy for them to can rid of these infiltrators. And then it's becoming more difficult when it became a political party now governed by the so-called rules of democracy, because it is no longer confined within the party. There's external forces which are not only reactionaries or enemies, but also laws that are laws of the country, electoral laws that are governing or ruling the party despite its constitution only. And that's part of the challenge. Being in a democratic dispensation, actually, it has worked against the former liberation movements. You look at the history of the PAC itself, they are more in court than building the party, and ANC is faced by that. However, the leaders of the ANC, they like to say it's a broad church. It's a big organization. They accommodate the communists, the capitalists, Democrats, non-Democrats, and so forth. Some of the challenges of being a broad church is you will be faced with bigger challenges, bigger obstacles, and so forth. And that is what is happening. But also, these people who are rushing to courts, I don't think they are exhausting the channels that are created and provided for by the constitution of the organization. I don't think they're doing so. And it's an element of mistrust. It's an element of not having confidence in the structures that the party has created. And I think that's where the challenge is. And I think the leadership of the ANC is failing to handle this, actually. It's like you are having your own fleet and you are unable to control and handle your own fleet. Everybody from, if you look at NEC members like Mr. Matthew Posa, actually himself, who's supposed to be giving a direction, he himself running to court to go and challenge the organization he's supposed to be leading. Whom is he challenging, actually, because he's part of the leadership? And that's where the challenge is. If leadership can do the same, what about members on the ground and the grassroots level?
Yeah, and is it also an abuse of the democratic process, as you're saying, it is a broad church and every voice count, that if you are not satisfied with the internal grievance processes or the conflict resolution thereof, you already want a predetermined outcome? So if your faction, for example, doesn't win, therefore you can run to the courts.
I think every member should be allowed to approach the courts as a last resort. But it seems to be a first resort, and that's problematic. But I think we must ask whether the processes within the ANC have lost credibility, that people feel the need to go outside of the organization. And perhaps the organization needs to take a hard look at itself while members are doing this. Because what we have is we have a process of self-mutilation within the ANC at the moment. And that is tragic. I mean, not only ahead of this electoral conference, but for the real fight, which actually is not in December, but which begins in 2019 in the general election.
Is this lack of quality, credible leadership through the eye of the needle kind of character and attributes, or is it a case of the processes themselves not being able to deal with the diversity in the party?
Well, in order to deal with any disputes, Cindy, you will need a little bit of both. You will need good quality leaders and leadership, and the ANC has good leaders. They've got experienced leaders, educated leaders, they've got very good leaders. But you need a leadership that will be able to use this weapon that has been put in front of them to kind of resolve problem, which is their constitution, their structures, and their processes. But education and political education becomes important, whereby if the members of the ANC from top to bottom were given political education that actually informs them of how to conduct themselves in terms of leadership squabbles, in terms of organizational squabbles. And it's lacking. You can see that it's lacking. Somebody learns to go to court. They don't care the cost. They don't care. You see, there's something also that we should worry about. Who is funding all these court cases of ordinary poor members and branch members? Because it's very expensive to take a case to court whereby you have advocates and senior counsels representing 18 people from a branch. Somebody's funding these, skirmishes that are happening within the African National Congress. If I was in the ANC leadership, I'll be worried about who is funding all these court cases. Somebody's behind it. And that's where the infiltration comes from. That's where the enemies of this political party have seen the opportunity of how they can infiltrate the party. And that's where leadership lack the ability to can defend and protect, put a firewall against the organization to say, we will fight inside, we'll contain it inside. We have learned the experience of containing it, but we'll put a firewall around ANC and its members that external forces, if they infiltrate, it should be minimal. But at the moment, it's actually in almost every province, there's squabbles and court cases amongst the ANC itself. Is it imploding? I don't think so. But actually, they are weakening the organization, as Kim said at the beginning. They are supposed to be talking of unity within the organization at the moment and pushing it the way, for example, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has been talking about unity, Didi Mabuza has been talking about unity, but it is not happening. It feels like they don't hear each other. It looks like the members are not hearing what the leadership is saying. And also the challenging factor is this unity is heard only from a certain part of the leadership. That's another problem. If the entire leadership of the ANC was talking about unity, at first, but it's not. It's some certain factions or part of the ANC.
And unity at what cost? Is it unity at all costs? But this is also unprecedented. We haven't seen the ANC being facing so many court challenges previously. What makes it, especially now, so difficult for the party to manage internal squabbles?
Well, I think the party's feeding off factions at the moment, rather than unity. So the unity is just a veneer. And I think we've seen the highest level of contestation ever in the ANC. And instead of seeing that as a celebration of many voices trying to lead in great leadership, I think we're seeing very dire leadership emerging. And that's extremely worrying. And I think the time for leadership is in the next 5 days, where I think top leadership need to come together and say, stop this fragmentation, because it's not serving anyone well. It's as if the NC journey ends on the 21st of December, when it actually really begins and takes the NC into a new era of leadership. But it cannot do that on a very damaged and fractured leadership or policy framework, and I hope that is not the result of this conference.
Yeah, and the legitimacy, of course, of branch nominations and delegates that will be representing their constituency at the National Elective Conference, does that also put a cloud, or rather question the process, whether it will be free, fair and transparent?
Look, if the Secretary General's office have signed off on these branches, it will be very difficult after the National Elective Conference for these branches to rise and go and challenge it. I don't say it will happen, but it's going to be very difficult. I would see it as a fruitless process that they should embark on. We are seeing these cases increasing. One, because the organization is challenged and is growing. Two, it's because it's facing the most fiercely fought elective conference ever. I'm telling you, Cindy and viewers, after this elective conference, whoever is going to lead the ANC, and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma is talking about it now, that whoever will win should look forward to taking the organization forward. But after this elective conference, these cases will die. Some of these cases, they will not be followed up. There will be no drive by the people who oppose cause, there will be no reason for them to go and try and nullify, whatever has happened this December. It is going to depend on the leadership of the ANC that is going to be sitting with us for Monday next week, who will be sitting and focusing on, let's bring everybody to the table. Let's bring, it takes me back to the CODESA negotiations. If black political parties during CODESA were sitting on one side of the table and the apartheid regime, a National Party and the Freedom Front Plus and what, they were sitting on another table, we would have not been where we are as a nation. But because black liberation movements, they went to the table fragmented and separated. That's why we are finding us as a nation in a mess that we are today. So if the ANC is going to a national elective conference with all these factions and fragmentations, then it is up to those who will triumph during the conference to bring all these factions to the table and say, this is our movement, this is our big church, let us sit down and let us move forward. Because policy and principle of the organization is supposed to be guiding them. But no. They are even having different tongues on the policies of the organization, and that's even much more of a challenge.
So that you're saying that the general, being familiar with the policies of the ANC, being inducted so that you all speak from the same constitution is not necessarily what's happening at the moment. And maybe the novice or the incumbent new members are the ones that are problematic because the processes haven't changed. It's either the characters that come into the organization have got their own mandate outside of the movement.
Well, I think that's possibly a bit unfair to new members, and I think it's incumbent upon the very experienced leadership to provide guidance. And despite great claims of this political schooling, I don't think enough has been done. And perhaps that needs to be a priority in the next 18 months up to the general election. But if we have a look at how top leadership is conducting itself at the moment, I think they're being very short-sighted and very puerile, and they're possibly setting a very, very bad example to the younger members that are coming into the ANC, and possibly scaring off some potential members as well. So the yardstick of leadership that they're showing at the moment is not exemplary in any manner.
Lack of influence or persuasion. Maybe that's the word, that leaders are not able to bring in and rope in new members or whoever disgruntled members are there. Is it a bit too late now to try and rectify how the processes have been applied and executed?
It is late for the elective conference, but it is not late for the organization to resuscitate itself and go and rebuild credibility primarily amongst its own members. As Kim is saying, it's a problem for the new members. It's a problem for those who are interested to go and join the political party named the ANC to say, I want to be part of that. However, my problem is they're fighting among themselves. People are asking questions outside, especially youngsters. Look at the youth, which is a very influential electoral power. Any organization that does not target the youth between today and 2019 is doomed. Now, how are you going to recruit the early 20s, youngsters, if they are looking at you, that you can't even control each other, you are fighting for each other, you don't even talk of the policies of the organization towards the elective conference, which is going to endorse and sign off the policies. None of these leaders are mentioning this thing, the actual policies themselves. We know that Dr. Nkosi Dlamini Zuma is talking radical economic transformation, which is part of the ANC. Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa has brought something new at the moment, but none of them is talking about the policies that the organization set in July and signed them off at the policy conference. They're supposed to be rubber stamped, endorsed, or reversed at the elective conference. And that is not attractive to the youngsters of today who are privileged than us, who have access to information, who read, who get excited about democracy and all these processes. And the leadership is failing. But also, I looked at, preparing for these interviews, and I looked at the role of the ANC stalwarts. If you form this stalwarts leadership or wing, whatever it's called, of the ANC, and it's focusing on attacking the current leadership of Jacob Zuma and his people, then they're also not helping the situation. Because if you are a stalwart, you are an elder in a family, and things goes wrong, you will focus on making sure that those who are coming up don't fall into what you regard as a wrong thing at the moment. You should be educating the youngsters how they should believe, the new ones, how they should conduct themselves and behave, instead of forming the stalwarts organization or wing that is focusing only on saying to the leadership currently, you are wrong, you are not right.
So Kim, do you agree that everybody wants to score the glory goal as opposed to being a part of a team or with a common vision to restore the organization, to ensure that it comes through as united and win successfully in 2019?
Yeah, I think your analogy is very fitting. And I think I've said before that the ANC is acting a little bit like Bafana Bafana and scoring its own goals at the moment. But I think the cohesion of the team is missing, and that's very problematic. And I think that I'm hoping there's a miracle in the next few days and we see cohesion. Because like 20 years ago, I think the ANC was a badge of honor across generations, and it's becoming less so. And it's very problematic because the ANC actually could be facing the best of times now as it implements economic liberation. And it cannot afford a fragmented organization. And South Africa cannot afford that because we're going into the most important phase of our liberation.
That being the second transition of economic inclusion, and a lot rests on the delegates in terms of how they vote and which presidential hopeful and executive that they select. But do you think that there's going to be more blood on the floor, as it were, before we get to the elective conference?
Look, I think the situation has subsided a little bit regarding the matters in KwaZulu-Natal. You know, there were those 3 weeks where there was murder every day. And I think that subsides a little bit. The situation has come down. I think it's also good that the KwaZulu-Natal PGC, you know, or they said and they completed this process, because that was part of the problem as well. But this process is, like I said earlier on, members are not educated enough on how they work, or they're being disrespected, and they lead to things like skirmishes and squabbles and fights and killings and all that. And I'm glad they've passed. Now, the focus should be on going to the conference, and the leadership that will be victorious after the elective conference, their primary focus to be to go back to the structures and tell the structures to say, even if you were on this slate or you preferred this leadership, let us respect the one that has come up. That is very crucial. That they must do, to go back to the branches and tell the branches to respect whatever came out and to build the organization. Once they can win that part, then they will be able to put their energies regarding rebuilding the organization, because government is sitting. You know, in government, President Zuma and his team are sitting in government up to 2019. Those who are taking over from next week, they should focus on rebuilding the organization in order, if they are intending to win come 2019, in order to win until 2019, the new coming leadership, they should not focus on government, because we have the government. They should focus on building and rebuilding the ANC. Then I think they will do well.
Earlier on, you mentioned the democratic process and the pristine democracy within the ANC, that in itself could be what has led to too much freedom, if you will, where members do not work within the parameters of the party. If they don't like a particular outcome in a branch general meeting, therefore you go to court. Should the ANC now start looking at sterilizing the organization and perhaps having to shed itself of those that are not towing the party line?
Well, I think any contravention of very clearly set out ANC policy guidelines regarding electoral processes and policy matters, whether it's from the president to the ordinary member, any transgression needs to be dealt with. And perhaps there needs to be a bit of an audit of the process. But I would imagine that's being done by the SG's office. And if it isn't being done properly, then one must ask, why is that not being done properly? Because possibly as an outcome of that, we are seeing the spate of court cases, which I don't think it needed to escalate to that level. You know, I hear some people celebrating the fact that we may have 402 delegates from Free State excluded. And I think people aren't thinking about the fragmenting and fracturing nature of that kind of statement. It's like amputating a key limb and expecting the ANC to march to victory. But the ANC at the moment is crippling itself. And
I mean, the issue around, pussyfooting around discipline, we saw this when there was a call for President Zuma to step down, even from members of the NEC. There's now a splinter party in KZN where the legitimacy of their PEC or leadership was questioned, and it's led now to Dr. Makhosi Khoza having a party of her own. You can't operate in an environment of distrust like that to the point where almost personalities become greater than the organization.
And that's exactly where the problem is. If people are going to sit and disregard organizational rules and policies in order to satisfy individuals and personalities, then it becomes a problem, because we are sitting with almost 800,000 members. They are all important, those members. Out of the 800,000 members, you are sitting with almost 100 leaders. They are all important as leaders of the African National Congress. Now, if you are going to start nursing feelings of individuals, then you must nurse feelings of everybody else. But organizational policies are there. They were created in order to can be able to help situations. Now, when you come to dispute resolutions, you don't become rigid. You don't hit the people by the book and the paper only. You study the situation. You check if the rule of the book will be a preferred rule at this particular instance. But ANC cannot only go through the rule only today. They can't. They will have to come and look at the situation of who can diffuse the situation. Invite some of the elders, invite some of the influential people into the organization. If you are in dispute with Kim, and I'm friends with Kim, it will be very difficult for me to come and be a mediator to your dispute. You get somebody who is not conflicted. That's how you resolve these things, conflict. But you asked earlier on, was the court the necessary point? Is it the last resort and so forth? I don't think it should have elevated to this level. I still say the Secretary General's office or the leadership of the ANC, they failed to handle some of these things, properly when they were still small. Remember, these court cases, they didn't start now. For actually the last 15 years, ANC members have been taking, it didn't start now, it just mushroomed more. But they've been taking the organization to court. They allowed it. You see, democracy, Cindy, this democracy is a good thing when it's like marriage. It's good when it works. If it doesn't work, it becomes dangerous. And it's clear to us that democracy is not working in South Africa. And I'll tell you why. If democracy was working in South Africa, after 23 years of the so-called democratic government, we wouldn't still be finding an equal society as it was before democracy. This democracy has been imposed on African black people without them knowing actually what is it. Because once you know what is democracy, you would not even challenge the provisions that are made by that democratic process.
Just very last words, Kim, in that the court overreach as well, the role of the judiciary in interfering in the processes of the ANC. What other challenges or dangers does that pose?
Well, I think that they have overreached, and I think the ANC over its own affairs should be the primary decision maker. And once again, I ask why the adjudication hasn't been done by the party itself. So as a final word, I'd like to just say that Dr. Dlamini Zuma spoke about the conference being a safe place for all. And final word, let's hope that is the case.
We certainly hope indeed that's the case. Kim, my queen, thank you so much. That's Kim Hela, political analyst, Botsang Moilwa, a political analyst, joining us, looking at the number of litigation and court challenges that the ANC is facing, shy of just 5 days before the all-important National Elective Conference. We take a break. We'll see you shortly.